The starship Valiant drifted through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming with quiet efficiency. Inside the ship, the crew was gathered in the common area, laughing and talking after a long shift. Conversations ranged from engineering problems to the latest intergalactic news, but the real entertainment of the evening was the alien guest, Princess Vilara of the Tin Dominion. Vilara was not just any alien. She was from the proud Tzin race, known for their warrior culture, rigid traditions, and cold logic. With sharp golden eyes and smooth emerald skin, she carried herself like royalty. She had arrived on the Valiant as part of a diplomatic exchange program, but despite her formal mission, she spent most of her time challenging the humans around her. Tonight was no different. She stood with her arms crossed, an amused but skeptical look on her face. "I have studied your species," she declared confidently, her voice smooth and unwavering. "And I have come to an undeniable conclusion. Humans are biologically incapable of mating year-round." The room went silent. A moment later, laughter exploded through the common area. Crew members clutched their stomachs, some nearly choking on their drinks. A few engineers at the back actually fell off their chairs. Even the normally serious Captain Graves covered his face, trying to suppress a chuckle. Vilara narrowed her eyes. I failed to see the humor. One of the medics, Dr. Harper, wiped tears from her eyes. "Vilara, I don't know where you got that information, but I can tell you with complete certainty, you are very, very wrong." Vilara lifted her chin. "Impossible. All advanced species follow a controlled reproductive cycle. The Tin have ours every 3 years. The Yulden every 5. The Xilari even go into hibernation between cycles." She smirked, placing her hands on her hips. "So, how can you claim humans are any different?" Before Dr. Harper could answer, Lieutenant Ethan Carter leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Ethan was an engineer, tall and lean, with messy brown hair and sharp blue eyes that always carried a hint of mischief. He had been dealing with Vilara's constant challenges for weeks now, and he was not about to let this one slide. "Let me get this straight," he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You think we have some kind of biological off-switch? That we just, shut down until a hidden timer says go?" Vilara nodded. "Exactly. It is logical." Ethan shook his head. "Nope. Doesn't work that way." She frowned. "Then prove it." The laughter in the room stopped. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Prove it." Vilara crossed her arms again. "Yes, I require evidence. I have read your historical records. Your species is known to exaggerate. I cannot trust mere words." The crew exchanged amused glances. Ethan leaned back, arms behind his head. "All right. What happens if I prove you wrong?" Vilara considered this for a moment. The Tzin were a proud race, but they also believed in honor. A bet was sacred. "If you succeed," she said slowly, "I will grant you a personal favor. One request within reason." The room oohed at that. Ethan smirked. "And if I lose?" "You must admit, publicly, that humans are biologically inferior in this regard." The room booed. Someone threw a napkin at Vilara. Ethan, however, only grinned. "Fine. Challenge accepted." Vilara's eyes gleamed. "Then prepare yourself, Lieutenant Carter. I will expose your species' greatest lie." The crew burst into laughter again. Some were already placing bets on how long it would take before Vilara admitted defeat. As the night continued, Ethan leaned toward his friend, Ensign Riley, and whispered with a grin, "She has no idea what she just walked into." Riley smirked. "She's in for a wild ride." Ethan laughed. "Oh, this is going to be fun." The next morning, Princess Vilara sat in the common area of the Valiant, tapping her claws against the table with impatient confidence. She had spent the night reviewing human biological records, trying to find any flaw in their claims. But every medical file and historical text only reinforced what the crew had said. Humans really were capable of attraction and bonding year-round. She refused to believe it. Surely, the humans had misinterpreted their own biology. Across the room, Lieutenant Ethan Carter walked in, stretching his arms lazily as if he had already won the bet. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the machine, then turned to Vilara with a smirk. "So, Princess, ready to admit defeat?" Vilara narrowed her golden eyes. "Not yet, human. I require direct evidence. I will observe your kind personally and judge for myself." Ethan nearly spit out his coffee. "Wait, you're going to follow people around to study them?" "Precisely." She nodded, completely serious. "I will gather data, interview the crew, and confirm whether humans truly possess this absurd ability." Ethan chuckled and leaned against the table. "Oh, this is going to be interesting." Observation begins. Vilara began her scientific study by following crew members around and questioning them about their personal lives. Her first target was Dr. Harper, the ship's head medic. "Doctor," Vilara said, holding a small SIN data recorder in one hand, "I have reviewed human medical files. They claim humans are biologically capable of mating year-round. Do you confirm this?" Dr. Harper raised an eyebrow. "Of course. That's basic biology." Vilara's tail flicked behind her in frustration. "And you are certain this is not an exaggeration?" Dr. Harper chuckled. "Trust me, Princess, if humans had off-seasons, I wouldn't have to lecture half the crew about safe relationships every week." Vilara frowned. "So it is a constant biological drive." "Not just biology," Dr. Harper explained. "Humans form emotional bonds too. We don't just," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "act on instinct. We connect with people in ways that go beyond biology." Vilara made a thoughtful noise and scribbled a note. "Emotional bonds. Curious. I will investigate further." Dr. Harper sighed. "Good luck with that." The crew's reactions. As the day went on, Vilara's questions became the talk of the ship. She approached Ensign Riley, a young navigator, and asked, "Have you ever felt the need to engage in bonding rituals outside of a biological cycle?" Riley nearly dropped his tablet. What?" Vilara frowned. "It is a simple question." Riley scratched his head. "I mean, yeah, that's just how humans work." Vilara wrote another note. "Fascinating. And how often does this urge occur?" Riley turned bright red. I'm not answering that." The entire cafeteria burst into laughter. Vilara was unshaken. She turned and spotted Chief Engineer Dawson, an older man with graying hair. "Chief, do human pairs maintain attraction outside of biological necessity?" Dawson nearly choked on his drink. "Princess, you really don't pull punches, do you?" "Science requires bold questions," Vilara replied seriously. Dawson chuckled. "Let me put it this way. I've been married for 20 years. My wife still looks at me like I'm the best thing in the galaxy." Vilara narrowed her eyes. "Even after 2 decades?" Dawson grinned. "Especially after 2 decades." Vilara tapped her claw against her data recorder. Illogical, but strangely effective. Ethan's turn. After gathering evidence from the crew, Vilara confronted Ethan again. "Your species is strange," she admitted. "You claim to operate on constant attraction, yet it does not seem to disrupt your daily lives." Ethan smirked. "That's because we know how to balance things, Princess." She studied him carefully. "And you personally? Have you engaged in these constant bonding rituals?" Ethan's smirk widened. "Why, Princess, are you asking about my love life?" For the first time, Vilara hesitated. "I require a personal account for research purposes." Ethan leaned forward. "All right. How about this? Why don't you shadow me for the next few days? That way, you can observe human behavior up close." Vilara narrowed her eyes. "You are attempting to turn my study into a social experiment." Ethan grinned. "Maybe. But hey, you wanted proof, right?" She thought for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "Very well. I accept your proposal. I will observe your interactions personally. Ethan leaned back, grinning. Oh, this is going to be fun. The crew, who had been eavesdropping, burst into laughter again. Riley whispered to Dawson, "She has no idea what she's in for." Dawson chuckled. "Poor girl doesn't stand a chance." As Vilara walked off, still taking notes, Ethan couldn't help but smirk. This bet was about to get a whole lot more interesting. For the next 2 days, Princess Vilara followed Lieutenant Ethan Carter everywhere. She took her scientific study seriously, carrying her tin data recorder and making notes every time she observed something that could prove or disprove human biological behavior. Ethan, however, saw it as a game. He made sure to act as human as possible, flirting with the crew, laughing loudly, casually touching people's shoulders, and making sly remarks whenever Vilara was watching. Vilara, meanwhile, was determined not to be impressed. Day 1. Social chaos. The first day of observation started in the engineering bay, where Ethan worked with the maintenance crew. Vilara stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching closely. "Lieutenant Carter," she said, recording her notes, "you appear to engage in excessive casual physical contact. Is this part of human bonding?" Ethan, who had just high-fived an engineer, turned to her with a grin. "Yeah, humans are social creatures. Touch builds connection. It's called affection." Vilara frowned. "Sin do not require such actions. We rely on verbal acknowledgments and formal respect." Ethan smirked. "Sounds cold." She raised a brow. "Sounds efficient." Just then, Chief Engineer Dawson clapped Ethan on the back. "Good work today, kid." Vilara tilted her head. "Another example." Ethan shrugged. "See, just normal human behavior." She scribbled a note. "Humans use casual physical contact as social reinforcement, possibly unnecessary. Further study needed." Ethan peeked over her shoulder and laughed. "You make it sound so clinical." Vilara ignored him. Day 2. Unexpected reactions. Vilara continued her observations in the cafeteria, where she sat next to Ethan, watching the crew interact. She saw a young couple sitting close, whispering to each other. Another pair held hands while eating. A group of friends laughed loudly, sharing jokes. Vilara made another note. Human attraction is not limited to a single cycle. Constant interaction observed. Ethan smirked. "See? Proof." She narrowed her eyes. "I still suspect this is behavioral conditioning, rather than biological necessity." Ethan leaned closer. "All right. What about this?" He gestured toward a couple who had been together for years, but still looked at each other like it was their first day. "You think that's just habit?" Vilara watched silently, her tail flicking behind her. The way the couple smiled at each other was different. It was not just instinct. It was something deeper. Something illogical. Before she could respond, Riley and Ensign Diaz walked past. "Ethan, my man," Riley said with a grin. "You're sitting pretty close to the princess there. Careful, or people might start talking." Diaz chuckled. "Or betting." Ethan, without missing a beat, draped his arm over Vilara's chair. "Let them talk." Vilara immediately stiffened. "What are you doing?" Ethan smirked. "Casual human contact. You're studying it, right?" She narrowed her eyes. "You are attempting to fluster me. It will not work." Ethan just chuckled. "We'll see." The breaking point. By the end of the second day, Vilara was growing frustrated. Everything she observed only confirmed what Ethan had claimed. Humans did not have a limited cycle. Their bonds were not just biological but emotional, social, and constant. But what frustrated her the most? She felt strange when Ethan was close. His casual confidence, his teasing smirks, the way he challenged her, it was annoying. But also intriguing. No. She shook her head. This was just a side effect of overexposure. That was all. The final question. That night, Vilara confronted Ethan outside the observation deck, where the stars stretched endlessly beyond the ship's windows. She stood with her arms crossed. I am forced to admit that your species' behavior does not follow the patterns of other advanced civilizations. Ethan smirked. Was that an almost admission of defeat? Vilara narrowed her eyes. Not yet. I have one final test. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? She stepped closer, her golden eyes sharp. I will observe you personally. You are a prime example of human behavior, so I must determine if you, as an individual, maintain this constant state of attraction and bonding. Ethan's grin widened. So, you're saying you're gonna be watching me now? She crossed her arms. Correct. Ethan chuckled. Princess, if you wanted to spend more time with me, you could have just asked. Vilara's face remained neutral, but her tail flicked slightly. I am doing this for science, she insisted. Ethan took a step forward, closing the distance between them just enough to test her reaction. All right, he said smoothly. Then let's see what happens. For the first time since she arrived on the Valiant, Vilara had no immediate comeback. And Ethan, he was having way too much fun. For the next few days, Princess Vilara focused her study on a single subject, Lieutenant Ethan Carter. She observed his behavior, recorded his interactions, and tested his responses. But there was a problem. Ethan knew exactly what she was doing, and he was having way too much fun with it. Day 1. Close proximity test. Vilara decided that to fully understand human attraction, she needed to test it in different environments. Her first experiment, physical proximity. She sat next to Ethan during meals. She walked beside him through the ship's corridors. She even stood uncomfortably close when they worked at the command console. Ethan, to her frustration, did not react as expected. Instead of flinching or acting embarrassed, he simply leaned into it. At breakfast, he casually rested his arm on the back of her chair. In the control room, he stood just as close to her, unfazed. Princess, he said at one point, tilting his head, are you trying to make me nervous? Vilara frowned. I am testing if human attraction increases with proximity. Ethan smirked. And, what's your result so far? She hesitated. She wasn't sure anymore. Something about Ethan's confidence made her own reactions unpredictable. She decided she needed more data. Day 2. Emotional stimulus test. The next phase of her study involved emotions. Vilara had read that humans form strong bonds not just from physical presence, but through shared experiences. So she needed to test that. She followed Ethan to the training room, where he was helping younger crew members with combat drills. Princess, Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Don't tell me you're studying this too. Vilara crossed her arms. Humans develop attraction through shared challenges. I will participate. Ethan's grin widened. You. In combat training. She narrowed her eyes. You doubt my ability. Ethan chuckled. All right then. Let's see what you've got. The match started. Vilara moved fast. Her tin reflexes were sharper than human reaction speed. She struck first, aiming to test Ethan's defensive skills. But to her surprise, he dodged effortlessly. Not bad, Ethan said, smirking. But let's see if you can keep up. For the next 10 minutes, they sparred back and forth, exchanging blows, dodging, countering. Vilara was impressed. Ethan was adaptable. He learned her patterns quickly, adjusting his style. For the first time, she was actually enjoying herself. Finally, with a quick feint, Ethan stepped in too close. Vilara found herself pinned against the training mat, Ethan leaning over her, grinning. Looks like I win, he teased. Vilara blinked up at him. She could feel his breath against her skin, his weight pressing against her. Her heart did something strange. Was this an emotional response? She shoved him off immediately. You cheated. Ethan laughed, standing up. Nope, just used human strategy. Vilara turned away, hiding her confusion. This experiment was becoming complicated. Day 3. Final confirmation. That evening, Villara found Ethan in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. For once, he wasn't teasing. He just looked thoughtful. "You're quiet," she observed, stepping beside him. Ethan smirked, "Trying to figure out your next experiment." She hesitated. "I think I already have my answer." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what's the conclusion?" She turned to face him. "Humans do not require a cycle. Your emotions drive your connections, making attraction unpredictable, a constant." Ethan nodded. "Took you long enough to admit it." Villara exhaled slowly. "It is fascinating. Illogical. Yet effective." Ethan tilted his head. "And what about you, Princess?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" He leaned in slightly. "You've been studying human attraction all this time. Have you ever considered? Maybe you're feeling it too." Villara's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in this experiment, she had no answer. And Ethan? He just smirked. "Guess we'll find out, won't we?" For the first time since arriving on the Valiant, Princess Villara felt uncertain. Her entire life, she had believed in logic, structure, and the superiority of Tsin biology. Emotions were secondary. Relationships were planned. Attraction followed strict biological cycles. But after spending days observing Lieutenant Ethan Carter, she had to admit, humans did not work that way. And worse, she was beginning to feel something. Day 1. Avoidance strategy. Villara was not one to panic, but she decided that distance was the best solution. She had gathered enough data. Her experiment was complete. There was no reason to keep interacting with Ethan. So, for the entire day, she avoided him. She did not sit next to him at meals. She did not follow him to training. She kept herself busy in the research labs, writing reports. But no matter how much she tried to focus, her mind kept wandering. She would hear someone laugh and immediately think of Ethan's smirk. She would walk past the training room and remember the way he had pinned her down. She would pass by the observation deck and recall the way he had looked at her under the stars. It was infuriating. Her body should not react this way. Yet somehow it did. Day 2. Confrontation. Avoiding Ethan, however, proved impossible. That evening, as she walked toward her quarters, he was waiting outside her door, arms crossed. "All right, Princess," he said, tilting his head. "You've been avoiding me all day. Why?" Villara stiffened. "I have no obligation to explain myself." Ethan smirked. "So it's true, then. You are running away." She narrowed her eyes. "I am not." "Really?" He stepped closer, his gaze challenging. "Because last time we talked, you seemed pretty interested in your little experiment. Now suddenly, you're avoiding me. Doesn't take a genius to figure out what that means." Villara clenched her jaw. "You are mistaken." Ethan chuckled. "You sure about that?" Her tail flicked in irritation. "You are insufferable. And you're flustered. I am not." Before she could finish, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Admit it, Princess. This isn't just an experiment anymore, is it?" Villara's heart did something strange again. She knew she should deny it, push him away, prove that this was just scientific curiosity. But the words would not come. For the first time, she had no logical answer. Ethan smiled slightly, seeing her hesitation. "Thought so," he murmured. Then, with his usual confidence, he simply turned and walked away, leaving Villara standing there, completely speechless. Day 3. The breaking point. Villara spent the next day deep in thought. Her study had taken an unexpected turn. Attraction was supposed to be simple, biological, explainable, predictable. But humans made it messy, emotional, uncontrolled. And now she was caught in it too. She needed an answer. So, that night, she sought Ethan out. She found him alone in the observation deck, leaning against the railing, staring at the stars. He turned when she approached, raising an eyebrow. Back for another experiment. Vilara exhaled slowly. No, I am here for an answer. Ethan smiled. To what? She stepped closer, golden eyes searching his. How do humans control this? Control what? This feeling. She hesitated. The unpredictability. The lack of logic. It should not make sense, yet. She clenched her fists. Yet, it exists. Ethan studied her for a moment, then smiled. You don't control it, princess. She frowned. Then how? You feel it, he interrupted. You let it happen. You stop thinking so much and just experience it. Vilara stared at him. That was the most reckless answer she had ever heard. And yet, something about it felt right. Ethan grinned. Come on, princess. You've studied humans enough. Maybe it's time to stop watching and start living a little. Vilara hesitated. Then, slowly, she smiled. Maybe. He was right. Maybe it was time for a new experiment. For the first time in her life, Princess Vilara decided to stop thinking. She had spent weeks studying humans, observing their unpredictable emotions, analyzing their illogical behavior, and challenging their strange attraction cycles. But now, instead of questioning it, she wanted to experience it. And there was only one person who could help her with that. Lieutenant Ethan Carter. Day 1. Reversing the roles. Vilara had always been the observer, the one studying Ethan. But today, she decided to change the experiment. Instead of watching him from a distance, she did something unusual. She acted like him. At breakfast, she took the seat right next to him instead of across the table. Ethan looked up, raising an eyebrow. Well, this is new. Vilara simply picked up a piece of fruit and took a bite. I have decided to test your theory. Ethan smirked. Oh, which one? She turned to him slightly. The one about feeling instead of analyzing. His smile widened. Now this I gotta see. And then, to his surprise, she leaned in slightly, just close enough to test his reaction. Ethan froze for half a second. She had spent days being logical, distant, reserved. But now she was playing his game. Something wrong, Lieutenant? She asked, tilting her head. Ethan chuckled. Not at all. Just wondering if I should be worried. Vilara smirked. Perhaps. For the first time, she was the one making him react. And she liked it. Day 2. The unpredictable effect. The problem with this experiment. Ethan was highly unpredictable. That evening, she found him in the training hall, running combat drills. She approached, arms crossed. I will join. Ethan grinned. Again, you sure you want another loss? She smirked. Perhaps I was simply going easy on you. Oh, is that right? Yes, this time, I will not hold back. Ethan laughed. All right, princess. Let's see what you got. The match began, and just like before, they moved fast. Strike. Dodge. Counter. But this time, something was different. Vilara wasn't just fighting to win. She was testing something else. Every time Ethan tried to predict her move, she changed it. Every time he expected an attack, she pulled back. Every time he thought she was retreating, she moved closer. And then, she did the unexpected. Instead of dodging his final strike, she let him pin her again. Ethan's breathing was slightly heavier as he hovered over her, grinning. Giving up already. But Vilara just stared up at him. No, she said softly. Just gathering data. Ethan's smirk faltered. For the first time, she had him caught off guard. And then, with a sharp movement, she flipped the position, pinning him instead. Ethan blinked. Well, that's new. She leaned down slightly. You were right, Lieutenant. He raised an eyebrow. About what? She studied him for a moment before answering. Some things are better experienced than analyzed. And then she simply stood up and walked away, leaving Ethan completely stunned. Day 3. Unexpected reactions. Ethan was thrown off. For weeks, he had been the one teasing her, the one testing her reactions. But now she was winning, and he had no idea how to handle it. "You seem distracted, Lieutenant." Ethan snapped out of his thoughts and looked up. Vilara stood before him in the hallway, arms crossed, watching him closely. He smirked, though he felt far less confident than usual. "Just wondering what you're planning next, Princess." She stepped closer, golden eyes sharp. "Would that make you nervous?" Ethan chuckled. "A little." She smiled slightly. "Good." And then, before he could react, she flicked his chin playfully and walked away. Ethan just stood there, running a hand through his hair. Oh, this was dangerous. Day 4. The line is crossed. That night, Ethan sat in the observation deck, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had started as a joke, a fun game of pushing Vilora's limits, making her react. But now he was the one reacting. He had never met someone like her, so sharp, so intelligent, so frustratingly fascinating. He heard the door open behind him. Vilara. She walked forward, standing beside him, watching the stars. "You seem troubled, Lieutenant." Ethan exhaled. "Just thinking." She studied him. "You do not like when things become unpredictable, do you?" Ethan chuckled. "Funny. I was gonna say the same about you." She turned to him fully, her expression unreadable. "Then let us test one last thing." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's that?" Vilara hesitated, just for a second. Then she did something completely unlike her. She reached out and took his hand. Ethan's breath caught. It was simple, just a touch, but somehow it felt huge. She squeezed lightly, then looked up at him. "Humans rely on feeling, correct?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah. Then this is my final experiment." She didn't let go. And for once, Ethan had nothing clever to say. For the first time since she had arrived on the Valiant, Princess Vilara was not in control. She had spent weeks trying to prove that human attraction was illogical, that their ability to feel emotions year-round was inefficient, unpredictable, and unnecessary. But now she was feeling it herself, and it was terrifying. Day 1. Uncertainty. After their moment in the observation deck, Vilara had done something she never thought she would do. She had run away. Not physically, of course. She still carried out her duties, still reported to the captain, still trained in combat. But she avoided Ethan. Not because she was afraid of him. She was afraid of herself. The simple act of holding his hand had sent a storm through her mind. It had not been calculated. It had not been part of her research. She had simply wanted to do it. That was the problem. Her entire life, she had been taught that emotions were secondary, that attraction was purely biological, controlled by cycles, dictated by logic. But Ethan had proven that was not true. And now, she didn't know what to do. Day 2, the confrontation. Avoiding Ethan was impossible. By the end of the day, she found him waiting for her outside the research lab. "All right, Princess," he said, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Vilara hesitated. "I do not believe that is necessary." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, see, I think it is. Because 1 minute, you're running experiments on me. And the next, you're avoiding me like I have some kind of space plague." She sighed. "I was merely considering new data." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what does that data tell you?" She hesitated. Because the truth was, she didn't know. Ethan studied her carefully, then sighed. "All right, let me make this simple." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Was it real, Vilara?" Her breath caught. He had never used her actual name before. Always Princess, always teasing. Now he was serious. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I do not know." Ethan exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, that's a problem. Because for me, it was real. Her heart did that strange thing again. She clenched her fists. But it does not make sense. Ethan chuckled softly. It's not supposed to. She shook her head. I was raised to believe that attraction should follow logic, that it should be planned, predictable, controlled. Ethan smirked. Well, you should have known better than to test that theory on a human. Vilara inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. Then what do you suggest? Ethan smiled slightly. Stop thinking. She narrowed her eyes. That is an impossible request. He chuckled. Then let me put it this way. Just let it happen. Whatever this is. Vilara studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Day 3. Acceptance. The next morning, Ethan and Vilara sat together at breakfast. No teasing. No experiments. No research. Just existing. The crew noticed, of course. Whispered. Smirked. Vilara ignored them. Because for once, she was not concerned with proving anything. She was simply feeling. And perhaps that was enough.